Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. About 6 months ago now, I did a video review of these new Walthers curved turnouts. And I got a couple of comments back from folks asking me to show step by step how to install these. And there was another individual who was having a problem with his because this combination of a closure rail and a point rail is a bit stiff. It's stiffer than your typical hinged type point rail turnout because it's one long piece of metal, and it tends to favor one route or another. And I'll show you some more about that as we go about installing these. And one of the things that I'll show you today is how you can install your Tortoise type switch machines so that they can handle these slightly stiffer rail configurations. And I'll also show you a little trick that I learned from DCC Concepts for installing your Tortoise type switch machines that makes it a little bit easier to get them in under the layout. So let's go ahead and get started. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Now this is the location where I'm going to be installing this curved turnout. So what we have here is a curve off of the main line that goes into the community of Tye River, where I'm going to do some interchange work, and also this track here continues on through past the station. About a year ago, I started work on this with a different turnout. It was before I received the Walthers curved turnouts, and as a result, the lines that I drew were for that specific turnout. And the turnout dimensions are a little bit different. The curved turnout from Walthers has a little bit broader curves built into it. So what I'm going to do is lay it out here on the cork, and I've taken, and you can probably see this already, I've taken and outlined it in a red magic marker here so that I have a good idea of where it's going to go here on the layout. Then, because in the past I had a different alignment here, I'm going to have to redo this section of cork. So I'll be cutting away at this and then adding an extension of cork roadbed right here where this turnout is going to go. So let's get started with that. Let's begin with my razor knife here, and I'm going to trim this cork back to the outline that I have now drawn with that red magic marker. So we're going to bring that around just about like this. And I'm going to cut it at an angle so that we preserve the shape of the roadbed itself. Now, let's see how that looks. I need to take off just a little bit more in this hump right here. Okay, that should do it. Let's take a look. Okay, that'll be good. So next I'm going to take sections of this cork roadbed and measure it out and cut it, and then we'll install it right here under the location for the turnout. So one thing I need to do is cut this at a slight angle right here to give a good join. And then we can bring it on out to about there. Okay. And we'll give it a cut right here, which will be right at the end of the turnout. So we'll have that set up. Now let's do the other side. Just so that I preserve the shape of the roadbed, I'm going to put a T-pin right here, and then we'll bring this into its position here. And give it a little bit of a curve here. Next, I want to take another piece of roadbed and add it to this section of the curve. And that's going to leave a gap, but we'll fill that in a minute. So let's take a look at how that's going to work. So the first thing I want to do is, again, cut a little bit of an angle on this section here where they're going to join. So I'm not adding it off of a blunt connection here. So we'll be able to add it just like this and come right out like that. So let me pin that in place here. Pin it like that. I'll work left-handed so that you can see what I'm doing. But we'll come out to the end here and pin it. And add a little curvature here in the middle. And pin it here as well. So that means that I need to cut this end right here. So there we have that. Next, I want to take my liquid nails for project that I use here on the model railroad for this kind of work, and we'll start tacking these in place. I've removed this section of roadbed, so now I'm going to lay a bead of liquid nails right down there where we want that to be. Like that. And then I'll take my putty knife here, it's about a 1.5, 2-inch blade on this, and flatten that out, smooth it out nice so we'll get a good contact with our cork. There, that's good. So now that I've got the adhesive spread out here, I'm going to lay the piece of cork roadbed in place, press it down firmly so that it grips, and then reinstall my push pins. And these are standard T-pins that you can get at most hobby shops. You can also probably find these on eBay and Amazon at reasonable prices. Now let's mark the outline here on this side of this piece of roadbed and remove it and do the same thing. With the adhesive spread, we can now reinstall the piece of cork roadbed. There. And push it into place here. And one in the center to hold it. The next thing I have to do is cut strips of cork from leftovers to go into these areas. So let me go find some leftover pieces of cork. So I found a leftover piece of cork. I'm going to set it right here and pin it in place. Then we'll go out to this end and mark some locations. Now the first thing I want to do is mark right here where I'm going to cut this end. This will be the full width, but I know it has to be cut right here. So there, that gives me 2 cuts that I can make. Begin with a cut right at this end, like that. And so that's going to be long enough. So now we just need to run a cut from this end to this end. So let me get out a ruler. So I want to cut it from here to here, which means just scribing a line right down there along this metal blade. And we'll see if that's going to work. So that's going to fit right in there. Next, I'll be doing this section. So at this point, I've got this section cut. Let's put in some adhesive for it. And I'll just take one of these scraps here and use that to smooth it out. Let's see, this one should do it. Now, we can add this section here to fill that in, like that, and out here at the end. So that just leaves this one thin area in here to do. I'm just going to cut a few strips to go in here. These little gaps in here, they don't have to be that tight because the ballast will go down in there and fill in anyway. So that's one way to work with that. Get that one in there, and let's see, we'll push this one down in here, like that. And let's see if I've got anything that will fit right down in here. Just break off a little piece to go in there. So there we have the turnout roadbed ready to go. And what I'm going to do is let this set up for a few hours, and then I'll come back and install the turnout in its location. Okay, I think that the adhesive has a long enough time to set up. So what I want to do now, let's take the pins out and see if everything's going to stay in place. That seems pretty solid now. Now, because I fit all these various pieces together, I want to go over it with a sanding block to make sure that everything is nice and level. That's pretty darn smooth. Let's see how the turnout's going to fit. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like. Next thing is to cut around the area here where I'm going to put my throw rod, and we'll pull that stuff up out of here so that I've got a good clean hole when I start drilling. I have a 1/4-inch bit installed in my drill, so I want to punch a hole right through the deck underneath the plywood, and I've put a cardboard box underneath of the layout to catch the sawdust. So at this point, let's drill a hole through the plywood. So the next job will be to install the turnout. Now I have added a section of track back here to connect between this turnout at Amherst and this turnout that we're installing now. So that's just about a 4-inch piece of flex track that I've added in here. And so it's ready to be glued down. The turnout itself is ready as well. I've tested it with my Tortoise, and I'll show you something about that in just a second. Now, if you remember when I did the review of these curved Walthers turnouts, they have a little spring in here that holds the points in place once you throw it. They do recommend, and most manufacturers that include this type of spring tell you to take these out if you're going to be installing it with any kind of motorized switch machine. So what I've done is you just pop that little cover plate out, and here it is right here. I don't know if you can see it. And the little spring will pop right out as well. And then you're able to move those without that spring clip creating any friction or any pressure against your switch machine. So that's ready to go in place now as well. At this point, what I've done, I wanted to show you one little trick here. Now, because of the curvature of the closure rail, point rail combination here, they tend to favor one direction. So this keeps popping back to this side here. And that means that it's a little bit more difficult for your switch machine to do its job. So what I've done is, I hope you can see this, I've added a little dog leg right here. So that's going to increase the pressure to one side. And that side here, that angle on this wire here, the actuating rod, is going to be placed so that it will push the points to the right here, on my right anyway, your left, but it will push the points to the right-hand side of the track. And that way it's going to close firmly against the stock rails. So at this point, I want to apply the adhesive here, and we'll get the turnout installed. Okay, let's go ahead and apply the adhesive and get it spread. Now, one thing you want to make sure, you do not want to put any adhesive down here where your points are going to be, because you don't want to fix those in place. Then I'm just going to run a bead down the center line here to about there, and one over here. So we got that covered, and then we'll run another one down here for our piece of rail. Just spread that. This is just a disposable putty knife that I picked up at the hardware store. They come in various widths. This one I believe is a 2-inch. Yeah, it's a 2-inch blade. So you can use these, keep them clean, and then once they get to the point where they're grungy, you can just pitch them, because they only cost a couple of bucks for several. The last time I bought some anyway. Generally you can, if you're using a water-based adhesive like this, it cleans up with water. So you can clean these up fairly well without any problem. Now when you're applying your adhesive, get a good thin layer. You don't need a globbed up thick layer on here. And that will just get up in between your ties and gum up the movement of those rails that have to close. So be very careful about that, and it makes it a lot easier for applying your ballast later. At this point, I'm going to insert my rail joiners over the ends of these rails, and we can drop everything in place. Okay, there it is. And I'll take my roller, and this is just a roller, an inking roller that I picked up at an art supply store. And it's great for getting a good pressure, even pressure across your rails or across your ties, or your sleepers if you're working in the UK. You can also use one of these rollers. This is a roller that's used for rolling wallpaper seams when you're applying wallpaper. So you can just roll that down the track like that, and it gets you a good tight fit there. Everything's in place now. I'm going to pin this down, and after a few hours, I'll come back. Now let me point something out. If you do apply too much adhesive and it comes up between the ties, leave it alone. Don't try to dig it out while it's wet. Let it set up, let it dry, and then afterwards you can come back and pick it out with a pair of tweezers or a dental tool, anything like that. But leave it alone, let it dry, and it will be easier to get it out without mucking things up. So I'll be back in a little while once this is set up. While I was waiting for the adhesive to finish setting up, I soldered the rail joiners here in place on all 4 edges. So that's done. I figure you guys have seen me solder these rail joiners enough that I didn't need to repeat that. Now one thing I do need to do is, if you remember, on these turnouts, there is a little connector right here that is attached to the frog. So you can use that to power the frog. So what I need to do next is drill a hole underneath of this little contact here so that I can run a wire from my Tortoise switch machine internal switch to this little contact and provide power to the frog. And if you remember from a previous video I did on preparing your tortoises in advance, I've got everything all wired up here, ready to go. So as soon as I install the tortoise, I'll be able to connect it to my feeder wires from my accessory decoder. I'll be able to connect it to the 2 truck bus wires to provide power directly to the frog. And this wire here, the yellow wire, will be the one that will go to this frog contact. So at this point, I need to run another wire in through here and solder it to this contact here. Okay, so I've got a 20 gauge piece of wire that's about 6 inches long for my feeder. So I'll run it down here. And I'm going to bend this over and down. So that once this is ballasted, you won't even know it's there. But I need to get my soldering iron here and make that final connection. I still use my weller when I'm doing work to any area that is not connected to a command station or a booster or any other electrical component, because I don't trust these guys to be adequately grounded. So let's get this soldered on here. I've got my yellow wire underneath here. One trick I'm going to try this time, I've added a couple of pieces of double stick foam tape to the top of the Tortoise switch machine. So that's going to allow me to at least maneuver it into place without having screws in there, because that is very difficult to do at times. So I will install this using the double stick foam tape, and then I'll run my screws up through here. I'm not going to show you that because there's just no way to get in there and conveniently do that. But it's a very straightforward procedure to just run this wire right here, right up through the hole, through your points, throw bar here, and fix it in place. So as you saw, I've got the connection to the frog finished here. I've got my throw bar here, wire from the Tortoise, installed and doing its job. So the next thing I need to do is take my flush cutters here and cut this guy off. So let's see if he's going to cut. There we go. Pretty good. And let's give it a try. Now, you can see the route is thrown for this direction. Let's throw the points. And now the route is set for this direction. So remember that little trick I showed you about using the dog leg on the throw bar or the throw rod so that you can get more pressure on one side or the other, because you're going to need it. These set of point rails tend to favor going this way, and so it takes a little bit more pressure to throw it that direction. But as you can see, once you change that with a little dog leg, it has no problem at all throwing the points so that you'll go that direction. And now, throw it back the other way, and we can go to there. So that's all there is to installing these new Walthers curved turnouts. Of course, this is going to work the same if you're doing straight turnouts as well. Just about any other type, any manufacturer's brand of turnout is going to be some version of what I've just shown you. Now, the next thing that I'll be doing is adding my flex track going out this direction so that I can complete that leg of the journey. And I've got everything set up here. So the next thing after that, I've got to run some wires up here so that I can provide power to my rails. And I've shown you how to do that in other videos in the past, and I'll put some links to those videos that I've done before. Well, that's it for today's video on these curved turnouts. So the next time you have a turnout to install on your model railroad, I hope these tips will be of some value to you. So have a great weekend, have a great week. See you here next week with another video from the DCC Guy. Bye now.